Football Convos number 7, Ken Crippen.
That's how they would gamble on the games, and there ended up being a lot of brawls after games. Things didn't work out the way they wanted to with their betting and stuff like that.
For daily conversations with the players, coaches, and contributors that make this game great.
Regulators, mount up! We're coming!
Football Convos. Here's your host, Andy Carlson.
Very happy to be joined now on Football Convos by Ken Crippen. He's on the Twitter machine at Ken Crippen, Crippen. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Ken is a pro football historian and author of the book, The Original Buffalo Bills, The History of the All-America Football Conference Team. Ken, I wanted to have you on today to get your football story. So where did it all start with you?
I grew up as a Buffalo Bills fan. So basically my love of the game was from that. Parents were football fans, and uncle and grandparents and stuff were all football fans. So it was just kind of born into me.
As a Minnesota Vikings fan myself, I commiserate with your plight. Where did it start with you in the writing, getting into the historical aspects of the game?
I would say it was probably maybe about 20, 25 years ago or so. I started researching the history of the Buffalo Bills and just kept going farther and farther back with the history of the team, and then discovering the team of the All-America Football Conference in the 40s, and then going back into the 20s. So it just kept building from the initial points, probably about 20, 25 years ago.
Now, when you're talking about the NFL, or excuse me, pro football in the 40s and the 20s, people see it as this big monstrosity, billion-dollar industry that it is today. But what was professional football like back in those days?
It was nowhere near what it is today. I mean, you've got players that played in their spare time, especially when you're going back to the 1920s. They'd practice maybe 1 or 2 hours after work and then play a game on the weekends, but really it wasn't a job like it is today. There was no training regimens. There was no workouts. It was mainly just getting together, running a few plays and stuff like that, and that was pretty much it. So it's definitely grown a lot since the beginnings back in 1920.
What was college football like in those days? It was much, much bigger than professional football back then, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, right now the professional game is bigger than college football, even though college football is pretty big. But back then, college football was king, especially when you started with pro football back in the late 1890s. Basically, it was discouraged to be a professional. It was kind of like a black mark on you if you were a professional. They wanted to keep everything pure and amateur. So it's definitely grown a lot, and it's definitely switched as far as professional football being bigger than college football right now.
When did you get started? What was it like working at Professional Football Researchers Association?
Well, I probably started there soon after I'd started researching pro football history. I contacted Bob Carroll, who was the executive director at the time, and he did a lot to really inspire me and to help me as far as, with my writing as well as how to research and things like that. So he was a pretty big influence. So then it just kind of started going from there. He encouraged me to write. I wrote some articles for their magazine, and it just kind of grew from there, writing more articles and then eventually writing books. I have 2 books out there now. So it's definitely, he was a big inspiration for me.
When you're deciding a topic or a player or team to research, what's that whole process? Do you get the name first and then you do the research, or does it just kind of come up organically?
Usually you find something that is kind of meaningful for you. Like when I started writing the book on the All-America Football Conference Buffalo Bills, it just kind of grew out of inspiration of researching that team and liking that team and just wanting to learn more. And then I started talking to the players that were surviving from that team, and it just kept growing, and then the book just kind of evolved out of that.
What would you say is the best era of football? 20s, 40s, today?
I mean, it really depends on what your preferences are. I mean, a lot of people like the game of today because, there's a lot of scoring and things like that. But, to me, I kind of like the early stuff. So when I was researching like the 1800s, late 1890s into the hundreds. I mean, that was something that I really enjoyed because you see the game evolving. And to me, seeing the game evolve, seeing how the NFL evolved, everything the NFL went through just to stay alive. I mean, to me, that's the most interesting. So I would say anywhere from like 1890 through like about 1929.
Wow. People don't realize how far back this game goes. It goes back almost as far as baseball.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it pretty much started soon after the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
When you started seeing the American game come out, it was probably like the 1870s or so. And then it just started evolving through like the 1880s, and then the first documented professional was 1892. So, I mean, you can kind of see, a lot of evolution of how it became the game of American football throughout that time period.
All right, so let's go back about 100 years, say a game from 1914, 1910 decade era. What would a professional football game be like back then?
Basically, the players would be playing all 60 minutes. There were very few substitutions at all. Basically, the only time you come out of the game is if you're, breaking a leg or breaking an arm or something like that. But other than that, you were continuing to play. It was also a lot rougher back then. I mean, quarterbacks can, be decapitated back then, whereas nowadays you can't really get close to a quarterback. So, I mean, it was definitely a lot more physical back then than it is today. Even though the players are bigger and stronger nowadays, they don't have the same endurance to be able to go through a game like they did back then. So even though they weren't as big and as strong, they were still just as tough, if not tougher, than the full football players of today.
What about the fan experience? What was that like back then?
There was a lot of gambling, something the NFL doesn't really want to urge.
Yeah.
But, a lot of times, in those early games, they'd be passing the hat around, and that's how they would gamble on the games, and there would end up being a lot of brawls after games. Things didn't work out the way they wanted to with their betting and stuff like that. So it was definitely a lot different. You would just have a few stands if you were lucky, maybe just a fence around the field, and that's about it. But it was very low key. Even if you had thousands of people show up, it was still not the event that it is today with all the tailgating and everything else that goes on. It's just you kind of showed up for the game, you watched the game, and then you usually had a few beers or so afterwards at a local tavern.
So you're saying there was no fantasy football back then?
No, they didn't have any fantasy football.
Stadiums didn't have to worry about their Wi-Fi signal strength.
No, you didn't have to worry about that. Didn't have to check on their fantasy teams, but it was definitely a lot different back then than it is today.
What was the coolest team that you've come across that few people don't know about from those days? I think mine is the Canton Bulldogs. For some reason, that's always stuck out to me.
Well, I mean, they were very strong back then. I mean, back before the NFL started, they were a strong team, and then they won a few championships once they got into the NFL. And that's where, you had people like Jim Thorpe and Pete Kalak and stuff like that playing on those teams, and it was very strong. So that's definitely one of those teams that's up there. I mean, I like the early Packers teams. Like, you got the 29, 30, and 31. I mean, they were the first that went and won 3 straight championships. I mean, you talk about the Lombardi championships, winning 3 straight there, plus all the ones that they won in the 60s. But yet the Packers were the first ones that were really a dynasty back then because they won several championships, including 3 in a row, the first professional team to do that. So I kind of gravitate toward them.
Now, were Packers fans as insufferable back then as they are today?
They love their team. I mean, basically it's one of those things where the whole town rallies around the team just like they do today, and they definitely supported them. And you can see when they were having financial troubles, they're the ones who picked up the ball, and they bought the team, and still publicly owned today.
Yep. And speaking of love for the team, you love the Buffalo Bills, and they were one of the AFL teams that started to really rival the NFL. What was that like during that time when there was 2 separate competing leagues?
I mean, there's a lot of similarities between that and the All-American Football Conference, where you had a major rival of the NFL. And the NFL always took the attitude of anybody who tries to compete with us is always going to be on a lower tier than us. Mm-hmm. The AAFC, they were actually stronger than the AFL was, so they were more of a rival. but you would have a lot of people switching teams, playing for both sides, depending on who would give them the bigger contracts. A lot of battles going on. I mean, they're always fighting with each other for the players and for the fans and stuff like that. So it was definitely pretty bitter.
Yeah, because back in the day, people don't realize how many different leagues and confederations there were of professional football, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, most people don't even know that there was many versions of the American Football League. The first one was back in 1926 that competed against the NFL. Red Grange had started that. There was, a couple of AFLs in the 1930s and 1940s. So you pretty much have, I think, like 6 or 7 AFLs nowadays, including like the Arena Football League. Then you had the All-America Football Conference, which is obviously a major rival. So, yeah, there was definitely several leagues that tried to go against the NFL. None of them were really successful, but I think the All-America Football Conference was the most successful of all of them.
And the NFL draft has sort of become behemoth on its own event where it's almost just as big as the Super Bowl. There's a whole lot of self-proclaimed draft analysts out there today, but you did a piece about the very first NFL draft. What was that like?
Basically, you're sitting in a hotel room, just a couple of the owners or representatives of the teams, and they would just kind of pick players, and there was really no analysis into it. I mean, there was no scouts going out there looking at a lot of these players. Basically, they would just rely on information coming from coaches of the various teams, and it was definitely nowhere near the way it is today. It was just very informal, and most people didn't even know it happened. You would just get a little blurb in the newspaper the next day, and that's about it. So definitely a lot of difference between then and now.
Now, what year was that?
That was 1936, if I remember correctly.
Wow. Probably a lot of scotch, a lot of cigarettes and cigars going on, too.
Pretty much. I think it was just a big smoke-filled room.
We'll take the Notre Dame kid.
Yeah, that's pretty much the way it went.
All right. We mentioned your book, The Original Buffalo Bills, but let's talk about your second one, Turmoil versus Triumph. What's that about?
That's about the Syracuse Athletics Association. They played from 1890 to 1900. So at no point were they, at least I didn't find any documented evidence that they were professional. It was strictly amateur. But it was definitely an interesting time as one of the strongest teams in the central New York area, if not all of New York.
And you also do a lot of Where Are They Now stuff for the National Football Post. Which player team was the most interesting to you throughout all that?
That's a tough one because every person that I had interviewed always had a great story, and there was always a great tidbit coming out of each one of them. I mean, whether it was Gino Marchetti, whether it was Nick Lowry, Tommy Nobis, I mean, they all had, something interesting to say and gave you insight into things that people usually do not get access to. So, I mean, the inside stuff, how things are happening with the teams, inside the huddle, things that happen on specific plays or whatever. I mean, it's definitely a lot of fun interviewing these players and getting their stories.
What about surprising? Give me a surprising story of one of your topics.
Well, I would say Gino Marchetti, when he was talking about his time with the 1952 Dallas Texans. He basically said there was no structure at all to the team, even the practices. I mean, a lot of times they would just sit there and take a football and just kind of play volleyball over the goalposts. I mean, that was pretty much what practice was like with them. So I'd say that was probably one of the most interesting ones that I remember from doing those interviews.
Yeah, see, I feel like stories like that from the old days before it became all corporate and buttoned up and just kind of cold and mechanical as the NFL can seem at times today. But like those stories of back in the day were the ones that are really endearing.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I talked to a lot of people, like when I was talking with Art Donovan, he was saying that, yeah, you were actually discouraged from working out. If they saw people lifting weights or something like that, they would kind of be, segregated from everyone else. That, usually the way you kept in shape was you go out and play basketball, you go swimming or something like that, but weightlifting was definitely not part of it, where obviously weightlifting is a big part of it nowadays.
Who's your favorite Buffalo Bill?
Are you talking current franchise or are you talking the AAFC franchise?
How about one from both?
All right. I would say Probably Tom Sestak from the current Bills franchise. I mean, he was definitely an underrated defensive tackle. I mean, he was excellent on the team and definitely did not get the credit that he deserved. As far as the All-America Football Conference, I would probably say Lou Tomasetti. Chet Mutrin, halfback, got most of the credit, but yet you watch the game films with Tomasetti and see the box scores afterwards, and a lot of it was he was just as good, if not better, than Chet Mutrin, even though Mutrin got all the credit and usually got more carries than Tomasetti did. But Tomasetti was definitely a strong player in that team, so I would probably say he was my favorite.
That's definitely going deep.
Yeah, I try. I mean, I try to do the research and try to find out as much as possible about these teams and these players when I'm doing the writing.
So you're saying Kyle Orton is not your favorite Buffalo Bill?
Not really, no.
One of my favorite players from my favorite team is Mick Tingelhoff, who was a senior nominee for the Pro Football Hall of Fame this year, and you did a little article on him. Why don't you tell the people about the Mick? What's something that people don't know?
I mean, he's definitely a family man. I mean, one thing that really stuck out to me when I talked to him on the phone is that he had some of his grandkids there with him, and when he was talking about it was toward the end of the interview. He was saying, and I have my grandkids here, and you can just kind of feel the warmth in his voice, and you can kind of just picture him smiling as he's talking about it, maybe waving to his grandkids. I mean, he definitely loves his family, and it came out within the interview.
What do you think about the Hall of Fame process, voting process as it currently is?
Not overly happy with it. Especially when they added this contributors category and they're taking away from the seniors in the process. I definitely think that was a mistake. I don't have a problem if they want to have a separate contributors category, but don't make the seniors suffer as a result of doing that. So that hurt me the most when I heard them doing that they were going to take away from the seniors every other year. So, I mean, for the most part, I think the process is okay. You're always going to have bias whenever you have a process like that. So whether you have media people doing it, whether you have a lot of people say, well, we should bring in general managers and scouts and stuff like that to do it. They're all going to have their biases. So it's really going to be tough to eliminate that completely. But I think that I know when I've talked to some of the senior selectors, a lot of them really don't know about a lot of the older players, especially the really old, what we call super senior candidates, which is more like 30 to 50 years that they've been retired. They really don't know a lot about a lot of those players, so it's hard to imagine them really being able to do the job properly if they don't know the players that they're supposed to be evaluating. How are you supposed to know that, say, one player is better than another player if you really don't know much about the first player? You're automatically just going to go with the second player. Well, the first player may be the better player, and you really need to research it and understand these players in order to be able to make an educated decision. And I think some of that is lacking within the seniors committee.
Who do you think is the most deserving to be in the Hall but hasn't quite gotten in yet?
Well, I'm just going to focus on seniors because that's really my area of interest, and my favorite is Laverne Dilwig. He played with the Packers back in the late 20s, early 30s. He was the end for the Packers before Don Hudson. And you talk to Hall of Famers, whether it's like Red Grange or Bronco Nagurski, they all say he was the best end that played during those days. The sports writer said he was the best end that played during those days. You research him, there's no doubt at all that he was the best end of those days, but yet he can't even get a sniff to get into the Hall of Fame. And to me, that's a problem, and a lot of it is because he played too long ago.
Yeah, that is a shame. And like what you said with the contributors and the seniors now going alternate, that's just a real shame for him.
Right. Yeah, so chances are he's never going to get a sniff of the Hall of Fame. He was in the final 15 one year, and I don't know if he's going to get back there. I mean, you have people like Al Wistert as well. I mean, he definitely belongs in the Hall of Fame. He's got the better qualifications than a lot of people that they put up over the last 5-10 years, but yet he was in the final 15 once, and I'm not sure if he's ever going to get another sniff of the Hall of Fame after that.
And speaking of the changing game, what are your thoughts about this new emphasis on the passing game where all the rules seem to favor the offense, especially the quarterback, where quarterbacks from the 40s, 50s, and 60s who were great in their time are now their numbers are now being dwarfed by, don't want to say mediocre, but like mid-level average quarterbacks nowadays.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. I don't like handcuffing the defenses just so you can try to get more scoring out of it. I'd like to have the offense and defense have, level playing fields. That's my opinion. And so when you start, skewing things toward one side of the ball over another, that it kind of takes away from what football really is. So, I mean, if you want it to be the Arena League, that's fine. Then you can go and have everybody have a running start going off to go out and catch passes, and you're not allowed to touch a quarterback. And to me, that's not football. You got to go out there, and it's a physical game, and chances are people are going to get hurt. That's the way it is in football. But I don't think you should skew things one way or another just to protect one particular person on the field.
Now, one of your latest projects is historical scouting reports. Tell me about that.
Basically, what we want to do is try to educate people on the older players, mainly the seniors players that would come up for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. A lot of people don't have access to the game films, and you even talk to the senior selectors, and they don't watch the film at all. So I want to get out there and really educate people on these players, let them know, the strengths, the weaknesses of these players, and try to give everybody a real glimpse as to what type of player they really were. So we review all the game films. We go through things just like they would on the college football scouting reports, and we write up a report on the player's career. So one of the ones we've worked on is Mick Tingelhoff, which you've probably seen.
Oh, yeah.
So we've gone through at least 24 to 25 films so far of him. We've got more that we want to review, and we just break it down game by game. How did he play? What were the strengths? What were the weaknesses? And then we give an overall assessment of him based on his entire career of looking at all those game films. So we look at different specific factors and things associated with that player to try to give you a real picture of how well they played throughout their career.
Outside of Mick, who's had the most impressive tape?
I would say, we had Al Wistert on there. He's received some. Ox Emerson has received some from a few of the Hall of Fame selectors. So those are the ones that we've done so far. We have a few more that we're working on right now. Jerry Kramer, Bob Skoronsky, Mike Curtis, Johnny Robinson, Eddie Metter, a lot of players that are continually coming up in the Hall of Fame discussion. And so hopefully throughout this off season we'll be able to get a lot of those reports out there so that we have a better view of each of the different positions that are coming up and a lot of the players that played those different positions and, kind of ranking some of them as far as how we see them watching the game film.
Jerry Kramer, that's a name that always gets kicked about as someone who should be in, who isn't. Yeah,
he definitely comes up a lot, and it depends on who you talk to. Some people think he's a Hall of Famer. Some people think that he's a Hall of Very Good guy. A lot of people point to the block that he had in the Ice Bowl. But if you want to see a block, you got to watch Al Wistert's block in the 1948 championship game. He took two players, rotated them around 90 degrees to open up a huge hole on a snowy surface to allow Steve Van Buren to go in for the winning score pretty much untouched. So if you want to talk about a clutch block in a championship game for the winning score, you really have to look at Al Wistert's because he definitely sets the standard for blocks in clutch situations.
Absolutely. Now I have to go look that up because that sounds interesting.
Yeah, it may be on YouTube. I'm not sure, but if you can find it, you definitely have to watch that at the end of the game in the 1948 championship game.
All right, Ken, we got to get off the field, but before we do, let's go 3 and out, which is a list of 3 quick-fire questions to bring us on home in victory formation. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right, first off, who has been the most influential in your career as a historian?
I would say my predecessor as executive director of the Pro Football Research Association, and that was Bob Carroll. He basically took a lot of time with me to help with my writing and help with researching and inspiring me to really do a lot. And I would definitely say it was Bob Carroll.
What's one piece of advice you give to someone who want to follow in your footsteps?
I'd say write as much as you possibly can, and a second one is go out and start talking to as many people as you possibly can. Try to get interviews, try to talk to people, work on your interview skills, work on your writing skills, and I think that's the best way to get out there and to really build your craft.
What's a book recommendation for us, football, life, or otherwise, besides your two books?
I would say The Best Show in Football by Andy Piasek. He's talking about what I consider the greatest dynasty in pro football, and that's the 1946 to 1955 Cleveland Browns. He does an excellent job talking about the Browns and talking about the All-America Football Conference in general and why the All-America Football Conference is at least on par with the NFL, if not better than the NFL. So I definitely recommend his book.
Back when Cleveland Browns fans had hope and were
winning. Yeah. They went to 10 straight championship games, winning 7 of them, and there's nobody in history that will ever repeat that.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
They were an awesome dynasty, in my opinion, the best dynasty in pro football.
What's next from you? What should people be excited for?
I'm going to continue working on the historical football scouting reports. We're hoping to get a lot more, like I said, in the off season, and I think it's definitely going to help people as far as learning about these players that played back, before some people were even born, or back in the early memories of their childhood. So I think that's something that they'll definitely look forward to, and I'm hoping that people will be excited about it.
And how can people interact with you?
I would say the best thing to do is go to my website at kencrippen.com, Crippen, and they can contact me through there, and they can see not only the scouting reports, but also any of the other articles, whether it's the Where Are They Nows or anything else that I've done. They can see it on the website.
Beautiful. All this info will be available on our Football Convo show page as well. Ken, thanks for taking some time day after Christmas, and it's good talking to you, and thanks for coming on Football Convos. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Football Convos. For more daily football conversations, visit footballconvos.com or visit us at iTunes.